tonight's episode of Trekosophy, the podcast about the philosophy of Star Trek, is brought to you by Sluggo Cola, now with the exciting flavor of Diet Cola. All the slime, half the calories. Joining us tonight is our host, a man who really does have the lobes for philosophy, Ben McLean.
Hi.
And our navigator on the river of the Great Material Continuum, Chris McGee.
Good evening.
And our special guest this evening is our prized collector who has his Marauder Mo action figure still in its original packaging, Brendan Kirby.
True and true.
And I am, of course, Bill Allen, a.k.a. the guy in the red shirt. And tonight's topic, if you haven't figured it out, is Ferengi.
Right. Thanks, Bill. We really appreciate your coming up with something interesting to open the show with. It really
it's the highlight of my evening.
It really helps. It really helps sell the show. You know, bring people in, get customers interested. You know.
Yeah.
By the way, we really need to look into monetizing this thing. Well, all right, so enough with the gags. The Ferengi are obviously, well, we're going to be talking about the Ferengi from DS9. They were kind of blank template bad guys, and then Ewoks in Next Generation. And
yeah, we're not going to be talking about the bouncy whip-wielding Ferengi. No.
Well, we should at least mention them. I mean, the Ferengi, before they became comic relief characters, they were actually kind of tough in their own right.
Well, I don't think they ever really stopped being tough as a species or as a race. They just kind of battled on a different arena from everybody else.
Everybody stopped taking them seriously, and that's, I don't know.
It's kind of what happened to Ayn Rand. Well, in the Deep Space Nine generally is a big, giant allegory of, or analog to, or exploration of the different philosophical and political and religious movements and impulses and recurring themes in real-world history and culture. And that is nowhere more directly true than the many dialogues between Odo and Quark, who typify so many things, you know, order and chaos, altruism and
egoism,
avarice. Yeah, altruism and egoism. Justice and avarice, just lots of things going on. But I also really think they represent the two ideological sides or factions that make up the modern conservative political movement in the United States, where Odo is the social conservative and Quark is the economic conservative. And ideally, every Republican convention would be like an argument between Odo and Quark over which thing's the most important right now.
That would definitely make for more entertaining television.
Well, yeah. Unfortunately for Republicans like myself, the party is too often more interested in what will have us win than what is the best thing for the country.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I'm not I'll say I'm a Republican only so long as it remains the party of Lincoln and Reagan, and the party of Bush, I go, meh. Anyway, Quark then is probably one of the most interesting and most colorful characters on DS9. From that first episode on, he is always in. He always has his own agenda and his own take on what's going on, and it's always It's usually a pretty humorous one, but he is involved in some serious important stuff. I mean, he's not a second tier character. He is one of the important characters. Um, well, I really think that Quark is meant by the writers. I have to say this very carefully because I don't want to give the wrong impression. I think Quark is meant by the writers as a parody or critique or commentary on the ideology of Ayn Rand and the radical libertarian movement. And Ayn Rand was a novelist in the 1950s who transitioned into becoming a philosopher, or at least she would claim to be a philosopher. Um, and she wrote books like The Virtue of Selfishness, which kind of antipifies her philosophy, which is that selfishness, what she calls rational self-interest, as distinct from irrational self-interest or theft. Um, Rational self-interest is and individualism are the cornerstones of her philosophy, and she stands against collectivism and altruism. And her most famous work is Atlas Shrugged, which is this ginormous novel in which the government's regulation completely destroys all industry and sinks the country into just about total abject poverty before the government finally collapses and the real achievers are able to actually start to pick up the pieces and rebuild over again at the end of the novel. I guess I shouldn't give too much of it away, but she has the distinction of being a real rebel, which not too many those who get called philosophers anymore are really that rebellious. I mean, she presented, even though I think it's a deeply flawed system, at least she presented a real challenge to the mainstream view and drove a lot of people to think, which then drove a lot of people in a lot of different directions and not just to agree with her. And in that sense, I think she was a great philosopher in that sense. She wasn't a great philosopher in the sense of coming up with a great system, because objectivism is the name of her system is objectivism. It's somewhat of a mess. But anyway, Quark, the Ferengi aren't quite a fair representation of Ayn Rand, because Ayn Rand has somewhat higher principles than the Ferengi have. You know, they are very ends justifies the means kind of people, and Rand is more about the wealth is worthless if you didn't really earn it. So that I kind of think that if somebody was to hand a copy of Atlas Shrugged to Quark and get him to actually read it, that could change the history of the galaxy in the Star Trek universe, because I really think it is the sort of thing that would make a huge impact on the Ferengi if it was if they got it. And I don't know whether that be for the better or.
You think it would supplant the rules of acquisition?
I don't know. Actually, it might be a good idea for us to pull up the rules of acquisition. I probably should have done that before we started. Let's do that. Rules of acquisition.
While you're doing that, I wanted to mention also that one time I had tweeted on Twitter that about some guy complaining about the S9 and how it was just all about Ferengi and how they were a caricature, and he hated Deep Space Nine because of that. And I tweeted about that, how I thought, man, he's just hasn't seen all the episodes or something or whatever. Well, believe it or not, Robert Hewitt Wolf who is on Twitter, he saw that tweet and he replied back to me. My one little brush with fame right there. And he said, remind him that Ferengi is Arabic for Frenchman,
Oh,
i.e.
really?
European, i.e. Western capitalist. In other words, the Ferengi are us.
Sort of. I usually think the Federation are us, meaning the United States, but the Ferengi are us in another way, kind of. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And well, basically, the Ferengi believe that every person's well, they really identify every person's value with what they do, with the material goods they acquire. Right? Acquisition is what their whole society revolves around, and they, on the one hand, they tend to be dishonest little scoundrels if it'll make them money. But on the other hand, and Quark points this out several times, their culture never had the sorts of horrible what's the word, atrocities and things that Earth culture supposedly supposedly the Ferengi never had like anything like the Holocaust happen. Um, Whether they had slavery depends on how you look at it, but they never had the sort of slavery that you know moved a lot of people to abolish slavery. Um, there was always a way to. It looks like there was always a way to eventually earn your way back out of whatever hole you get into. Um, if you just have the lobes, as they say. Which where does that expression come from anyway? Um, there's some kind of thing I remember reading people say back in like the 1920s, having the I don't remember. It wasn't having the balls though. That's been said too. But it was something weird like that they used to
Having the
say.
stones, I think, was another version of it.
That might have been it. Um, yeah, that might have been it. And Quark has to deal with it's a sort of clash of values going on with his nephew. Well, Quark and Rom, with his nephew and Rom being influenced by what the Federation, and Quark trying to stick to what he sees as the ideals of Ferengi society, which are sort of a combination between Randian and Machiavellian ideas. You know, they're Randian when they start talking about entrepreneurial spirit and all that kind of thing, and they get Machiavellian when they start talking about bribes and stuff. You know, Rand would not approve of bribes. Um, you know, she'd be for, you know, she was the minarchist type, you know.
Yeah, that was one of the interesting. I just recently finished rewatching Deep Space Nine, and in one of the last few episodes, as they're wrapping up all the storylines, they mentioned the fact that recently Ferengi society had initiated a tax code. That there had never been taxes on Ferengi before, but it was all part of the new initiatives. But I got to thinking about it, and for a Ferengi beforehand, basically, if you deal with a government official, you're going to bribe him or give him a gift or something. So Ferengi had taxes, they just called them bribes. It was money paid to the government for services rendered.
Right.
So a Ferengi bribe isn't necessarily a bribe. It's
Well, also there was a lot of racketeering that went on. You had to pay the Grand Negus a certain percentage of your profits to maintain your Ferengi business license, and that was
income tax.
that was income tax, even though they didn't call it taxes.
Nothing they called were taxes, but everything they did was it was just a free enterprise system where you ended up spreading the money around a little bit through. As long as you don't call it a tax, it's okay to
Yeah.
do it. But
They couldn't say that at the end, near the end of the Deep Space Nine series, in the episode Dogs of War, when Brunt mentions the word tax, Quark is pretty much horrified. He said, "Did you just say the T word?"
yeah,
You mean to tell me there are T's on Ferengi?
yeah, that was. Oh, that was the worst Ferengi episode ever.
Yeah, that
I
one's
I don't know. Prophet and
it
Lace
was
comes to mind.
yeah.
Prophet and Lace was actually an I mean, I was expecting that one because there was that earlier episode where Quark, what was the name of it? Where his business, he had a little flunky working for him that turned out to be a woman disguised as a man.
I think that one was Prophet and Loss.
Yeah, I think so too.
That was Prophet and Lace, yeah.
Okay, what was the one where Quark had to become a woman?
That was Prophet and Lace.
Prophet and Lace.
Yeah,
and
this is all the same episode.
No, they're actually
No,
two separate episodes.
There were. I
Oh,
mean,
you're
there were.
right. You're right. Pell was
First-
the transgendered or cross-dressing Ferengi.
Right, cross-dressing, not transgender. She was disguised as a male so she could make profit. And
Right.
then later on, we find out that Quark's mother is making profit, apparently huge, insanely high amounts of profit. And then finally, you have let's legally let females make profit. We need Quark to surgically become a woman in order to prove that females can handle business. There was this steady progression of sort of a gender equality issue within the Ferengi society.
Yeah, now I can understand trying to do some stuff with gender equality or whatever, but Armin Shimmerman playing Quark disguised as a woman, we did not need to see that.
Well-
That was too over the top. That was that was just a bad episode.
There was a point I wanted to make, and I think the fact that the Ferengi are a misogynistic culture is a good segue into this, because obviously Ayn Rand is a woman.
Yeah,
So I don't know that they would have accepted her just on that value. But my
well, she
thought,
wasn't a Ferengi woman. See, they didn't really regard women in other alien races as being really as really as women. I
well,
mean,
they were suspicious of Tasha when they saw her. They couldn't believe that they would allow a woman to have that place, or to both for that matter.
Tasha Yar. He's talking about. I was going to mention that one too because
The
that was
last
an interesting look at the Ferengi misogyny. They
Oh, that's back
they-
in TNG though.
yeah they
Yeah.
justified why, and it was a screwy kind of justification. But when you think about it, it almost makes sense. They say that it is barbaric and wrong to make females wear clothing because
Right.
if they're wearing clothes, if they're dressed, it makes
It
men
encourages
want to
undress.
undress them. It encourages rape. That was their
That's an interesting
justification.
point of view.
I mean,
That
it was,
actually has been things like that have actually been said by some people in primitive cultures, if I can remember right, in Africa and in some island nations. That argument actually has been made in history. I just wish I could remember where or where I heard that. But it
Well, I don't think there's any serious argument though that the Ferengi are misogynists.
oh yeah,
Oh, certainly
right.
they are.
It's
Right. And that was
benevolent
all.
misogyny. I think though they mean well.
I don't know that they mean well towards women.
Yeah,
I
I
think
might be stretching it a little bit because I mean I like the Ferengi.
It depends on which ones of them you're talking about. I mean, they're all different people, you know. Even though they are fictional, they're still all different people, and they'll do
I,
different things in different ways.
I don't think they would have accepted someone like Ayn Rand for their own culture. But the point I wanted to make was
I
I
think you'd be surprised.
well, maybe this is something worth talking about. But there's something else I wanted to introduce to the discussion too, and it was that I actually think the Ferengi, from what I've been able to glean from Ayn Rand, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, the Ferengi are the exact opposite of Randian ideals. And it's the way I interpret Ferengi philosophy. I interpreted the Vulcans to be claiming reason ought to be supreme over passion and emotion.
Yeah.
But the Ferengi will have their desires is supreme, but their reason is subservient to the desires. So the Ferengi are going to place what they want first, and then their intellection is going to serve that. Whereas Ayn Rand will say, no, reason ought to be supreme. So it's a polar opposite of what the Ferengi ideal is.
I don't know, because what Rand, I think Rand says in Anthem something to the effect that reason is supreme because it is the only way to get things that people want and for people to really live, as opposed to becoming dead like the nameless characters in her book.
Well, the deadness, from what I interpreted, was that people will follow superfluous teleological principles, to borrow a phrase from Nietzsche. They follow principles that are given to them from religion, that are given to them from their culture. They follow things like you ought to be self-sacrificial, but they don't really in their hearts believe that. So her point was that you ought to be objective and not just follow those premises or those impulses at face value. You ought to objectively question them, and you ought to use
Okay.
reason to question them.
Well,
The
the
deadness.
Ferengi are definitely a perversion of Rand's ideas. Not Rand's ideas, but a perversion of Rand's ideas. A series of more or less unflattering stereotypes.
What was Rand's view on hedonism, which is another aspect of the Ferengi personality?
I don't know.
Well,
You'd have to define hedonism. Never
I
seems
think
to stay consistent.
Hedonism, you mean?
Yeah, and I mean the different definitions I
Hedonism,
hear
yeah,
of that
sorry,
don't seem to
excuse me.
stay consistent. It basically means believing in pleasure as like the most important thing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah. And well, I don't know if I mean maybe Ferengi are only pseudo hedonists, but there is our hedonists, excuse me. There is this streak in them. I mean, it ties in with their materialism. So much of what they do is about their own pleasures. They're a very, very decadent kind of capitalist, not just some greedy corporate suit with no sense of humor. They're all about having everything. I mean, the whole thing about Umox, for crying out loud.
if you trace hedonism back to its source with Epicurus, he's going to say, yes, happiness is the thing to which we all strive, whether we admit it or not. But he also says that he could rival Zeus for happiness if he possessed only barley cake and water. So if he wasn't materialistic in the common sense of the term, if he wasn't just pursuing all these vanities, he would actually be happy. So if he abandoned everything that the Ferengi go for, this pompousness, this showmanship, he would be much more happy. So hedonism, I don't think, is desire is unrestrained. I think it's desire cultivated by reason. It's desiring something worth being desired.
Rand Rand gave a fairly interesting address titled Apollo and Dionysus, if I remember correctly, in which she contrasted the spirit of the Apollo moon launch and the spirit of the Woodstock music festival, and favorably for the moon launch and unfavorably for Woodstock. And she said that Apollo is basically, it's not a coincidence that it's named Apollo, because the old god of Apollo was all about reason and what's the word? Actually thinking things through when you do them, knowing yourself, and all that kind of thing. And Dionysus was all about getting drunk, the god of wine, and all this stuff. And so she contrasted two types of what she would see as uh, self-interested attitudes, and praised the one as rational, and repudiated the other as irrational, though still self-interested.
Well, you know the Nietzschean overtones of that, do you?
I'm not really
I'm
deep into
betraying my
Nietzsche,
Canadian.
so yeah, definitely tell us about that.
Okay, well, I mean, this was the thrust of his philosophy. His argument, and if you've read Freud, you've read Nietzsche. Freud took his ideas from Nietzsche. It was that.
No wonder I don't like either one of them very much.
Well, Freud, to me, Freud read Nietzsche, and where he saw Dionysian, he scratched that out and put id, and where he saw Apollonian, he scratched that out and put superego, and where he saw Apollonian Dionysian duality, he scratched that out and put ego, and where he saw Nietzsche, he scratched that out and put Freud. I think he ripped him off entirely. And Ayn Rand, I think, is trying to put herself forward as this anti-Nietzschean, because Nietzsche's whole view was that we, as a Christianized or post-Christianized philosophy, have elevated the Apollonian, or the rational, or the structured, or what he says the superfluous or the superfluous teleological principles, these regimented ideas, over desire. We no longer care about that which we desire. We care about these principles that are imposed. And he was trying to elevate the place of desire in our lives, the place of passion.
Yeah, that's what existentialism is supposed to be all about.
Oh, for sure. I mean, absolutely. I find that a fascinating way of looking at things. Now, Nietzsche wasn't saying we should be desiring things for its own sake. It should be guided somewhat by Apollo. There's got to be a marriage of the two. Nietzsche's view of things is that with the Enlightenment, with medieval philosophy, we've become so concerned with the scientific, so concerned with the logical, so concerned with the ethical, that we've undermined that which makes us human, our desires, our passions. He says, look at the ancient Greeks. They used to desire the great rush of horses. They used to want to go off to war because they felt threatened, or they wanted to conquer. And then you get to Socrates, where you have to justify all of your desires. And he says Socrates is the antithesis of humanity. We ought to...
For Nietzsche, anyway.
Well, exactly, for Nietzsche. And along comes Rand and says, no. It is all about the Apollonian. It is all about this objectivism. Yes, be selfish, but be objectively selfish. So I think she's putting herself forward as this anti-Nietzschean type.
Yeah, well, I know that a lot of people have seen more similarities than differences between Rand and Nietzsche. That was the whole reason of Rand being sort of unceremoniously booted out of the circle of sort of mainstream conservatism with the negative review for Atlas Shrugged in National Review.
Right.
And they didn't really see all. They really saw Rand as trying to become a right wing Nietzsche instead of a left wing Nietzsche, and didn't want anything to do with Nietzsche. And I can kind of see that in some ways, but it's not quite fair because she is in this context contrasted with Nietzsche, not. But they start from somewhat similar. They start from somewhat similar basic assumptions. I've noticed something that I think is pretty fascinating, and that is some important parallels between Nietzsche and I mean, not Nietzsche, between Rand and Marx.
Oh my.
Yeah, I mean, and I know that sounds like who could be further apart than Rand and Marx, but I really think once you get extreme enough, once you get far enough in the political spectrum, it really becomes a political circle. You start coming back to being the same on both sides when you get extreme enough. Um, and so here's some of my similarities I see between Rand and Marx. They both are materialists in the metaphysical sense. I don't think Rand will sometimes say things about mind as being not just happening by chance or whatever, or not just happening mechanically or whatever. But I really think when she's saying that, she tends to be talking about ethics. She seems very dismissive of any idea of any sort of dualism or supernatural or soul or anything like that when she starts talking about metaphysics. So, I really think they're both strict materialists, and of course, they're both obviously atheists. They both take they both have a somewhat similar reading of history, and they,
But it's economically driven?
yeah, really.
Okay.
I mean, they both see history as economically driven, and they both divide society into basic categories of people according to how those people make their living or relate to one another economically. Where with Marx, it's the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. I hope I pronounced that right. Did I? Does anybody know?
Bourgeois.
Bourgeois and proletariat. Is that
Yeah.
closer?
I'm
Okay.
Canadian. I can't pronounce anything right.
Okay. So with Marx, it's the bourgeois and proletariat. With Rand, it's the moochers, the looters, and the achievers. Um, Same sorts of categories. They're not the same categories, but they're the same sorts of categories. Um, Whereas, there are other philosophers who don't break people up into categories at all, or who break people up into categories like, not based on economics. Um, so even though of course, they disagree radically, there are certain mirror images that come up, and I think Rand might have arranged some of those on purpose. I think that, for instance, the moochers, looters, achievers categories, I think, are her answer to Marx's uh, bourgeois and proletariat distinction. I think she is thinking about that consciously when she writes that. I, I surmise. And there's a number of things that I think she wrote that were specifically trying to refute or provide an opposite sort of anti-communist manifesto in some ways. So it's just
Well,
that's just interesting stuff there. Sorry.
but would anyone argue with me if I were to say at the heart of Marx's writings would be this egalitarian ideal, where at the end of the day everyone ought to wind up equal? And at the heart of Ryan's philosophy, from what I've been able to gather, now I've not been in depth with Ayn Rand, is a view where people don't end up equal.
Oh, right. Yeah, of course. Marx is all about equality. Rand is all about inequality. And that's certainly
But she
inequality.
admires the inequality.
Yeah, inequality is a good thing according to Rand.
Right. But at the heart of Marx is a rebellion of the inequality of our society.
Well, yeah, and
Because
at the
Rand is
heart of
perfectly
Rand is a
comfortable.
rebellion against Marx.
You're okay.
I mean,
Fine.
if you wanted to take a Hegelian reading of it, then Rand is the antithesis of Marx.
Right.
Now, I'm not a Hegelian, but if I was a Hegelian, that would certainly be the reading of it that I would take.
Oh, everybody's tempted by Hegel at some point in their lives. And to draw this back to Star Trek, I suppose the Ferengi would also be quite comfortable with the concept of inequalities.
Oh, yeah. There's an interesting thing, though. The capitalist introduces a new kind of inequality, and that is an inequality of achievement as opposed to an inequality of birth. In medieval society and previous ancient society, who your parents were largely determined your lot in life, and the inequality was based on whose children you are. But in capitalism, at least in theory, it is possible for this sort of social mobility, where if your family is losers, you will be at the bottom within a generation or two, and if your family is winners, you'll be at the top within a generation or two, no matter no matter your circumstances at the moment. And so Rand is very much opposed to the old idea of hierarchical inherited inequality. But it's not the inequality she's against; it's the inherited without having earned it quality to the inequality there. So she's not just inequality is a good thing. She is that it anything good you have to earn. That's her idea.
Sure.
Yeah. As a and what you said earlier about desire, Nietzsche wanting to bring desire back as being central to our lives. It occurs to me, of course, I'm a Lewisian. I like C.S. Lewis, and it occurs to me, I've always never quite understood why he put so much emphasis on his argument from desire. Now I think maybe what he's doing is it's intended for uh, existentialist type thinkers. Never thought of that before.
Well,
Sorry,
I
just an aside. It's kind of irrelevant to this conversation, but
let's. I mean, don't tease us here. Let's. And I don't mean to put you on the spot because we've you have been lecturing us for some time. But why not
I don't
draw?
want to talk too much.
Why not?
Good.
No, okay, but I want to make you talk a little bit more. Don't tease us in that. Why don't you draw out that argument for desire and then let's discuss it? Because let's face it, this has direct bearing on Ferengi philosophy.
Well, maybe in a way.
Well, it's an answer to Ferengi philosophy
Well, maybe.
because the Federation.
The Ferengi reject one of the premises in the argument, but okay, I could do that. The argument from desire is Lewis is a Christian apologist, you may recall, and so his argument for desire is he's trying to prove the whole Christian idea of God and an afterlife and all that kind of thing, and it's not perhaps the most strictly rational sort of argumentation you might like, and that's why I haven't liked it much and haven't relied on it very much myself. But I haven't put much stock in it. I think that's the way to say. But it goes like this. It's basically saying that Lewis has this whole thing about joy in his book Surprised by Joy, where joy is this kind of longing everyone has, which they get sort of little glimpses of what the object of the longing is through some of the most wonderful sort of memories or moments we have in our life. And he talks about what some of them were in his life.
And his wife was named Joy by chance.
Oh yeah, well I don't think that was by chance,
No.
but then there, I don't believe in coincidence. But in seriousness, though, that the joy he's talking about here, I think he was talking about before he met Joy Grisham, and it sort of all took on a double meaning at that point. But joy is a kind of desire, and you can't grasp what the object of joy is. You can't grasp at joy. If you do, then what's the word? Flies away. You can't get it. You can't get a hold of it. At least not in this life. And he says, and the argument from desire basically has the assumption that all of us have this desire for which there is no corresponding. Okay, well, first of all, the first premise is that that every desire has a corresponding fulfillment. We get thirsty, there has to be such a thing as water. We get hungry, there has to be such a thing as food. We have sexual desire, there has to be such a thing as sex. We have a dream of flying, there have to be such people as the Wright brothers. Every human desire has an object of fulfillment, except, and this is the second premise, we also are all possessed of a kind of desire for which we can't really express, for which there is no object in this life. We are all uncomfortable with this life. And he goes to all kinds of different lengths to prove this one. But he says, that there's always something that's not in this life that we all have a desire for. And thus, the conclusion of his argument then is that the object of this desire must be in another life. Therefore, there must be another life. Now, that's perhaps not quite the most tight argument you've ever heard.
Yeah, it sounds a little fallacious to me.
It's a little fishy.
A little what? Sorry, what was that, Chris?
He said fallacious. I'd say it's a little fishy, because I can't really identify a specific fallacy in it.
Well, it does not follow, really. I mean, to say, oh, well, we're going to assume that there must be one desire you have that can't be fulfilled, though, therefore, reincarnation must exist.
He didn't say reincarnation.
You're basing, well, maybe not reincarnation, but he's saying that in another life
you will be able
heaven,
to. But reincarnation would be another possible answer.
Well, whichever it is, he's saying that he's basically making this determination based on an assumption.
Yeah,
and where is he getting the assumption from?
All arguments use assumptions, and this one only works if you accept those assumptions. And some people have had experiences that have convinced them of the assumptions behind this argument. Other people maybe haven't. And I'm not, like I said, it's not, the conclusion does follow from the premises. You could say it's begging the question because once you grant those premises, you may say that the conclusion is the same thing as the premises, and it's begging the question.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure. Maybe it shouldn't be called an argument in that case.
Well, it's an appeal to our desires.
Yes, it is. It is the argument.
It's not appeal to my mind. It's an appeal to my desire.
Right. Yes. and that's why I haven't put much stock in it. But I understand it.
But desires are human, though.
Yeah.
Here's where I find it interesting, because I think that there is a legitimate import into Ferengi philosophy. And it's that the Ferengi are so driven by desire. And there is such a thing as a purified means to satisfying our desires. And by that I mean you could have a heretical form of religion and an orthodox form of religion based on that concept. Peter Kraft, sorry, go ahead.
Which concept?
The thought that you could have a desire that is fulfilled or legitimately fulfilled or artificially fulfilled. Because if something is artificially fulfilled, then it'll wind up being vacuous.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, let me draw that out a little bit, because this to me highlights the distinction between Ferengi philosophy and Vulcan philosophy, or Klingon philosophy, and some other things that I would actually respect, but I don't respect Ferengi philosophy. Peter Kraft gives this thought experiment to illustrate C.S. Lewis's point on desire, and it is: suppose you have 4 objects. You can tell a lot about a child based on how they classify those 4 objects. And let's say the 4 objects are a basketball net, a baseball, and a baseball bat. And you
Hey,
have
isn't this from C.S. Lewis for the Third Millennium?
Where he compares him to Walker Percy?
Yeah. Isn't that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where it's from. Yeah.
I'm familiar with that essay, yes.
Okay, good. So,
but for the audience, explain.
Yes, please walk through it with us.
Oh, and for Chris too.
Okay, so you've got those 4 objects, and you've got 2 boxes in which you can place those 4 objects, and you tell the child, okay, put 2 of the objects in one box and 2 of the objects in the other box. The structuralist child will put the 2 balls in one box and the accoutrements in the other box. Whereas the functionalist child will put the baseball items in one box and the basketball items in the other box. Now, C.S. Lewis comes along and says, okay, let's do this exact same thing, but with science, technology, magic, and religion. And the knee-jerk reaction of our society is to put science and technology in one box and magic and religion in the other box. And there's something to the distinction having to deal with empirical evidence.
Oh, by the way, just a quick plug. This actual line of argument is the opening. It's going to be in the opening moments of my upcoming the concluding video of my. The upcoming concluding video of my series on the abolition of man on my YouTube channel at youtube.com/mrbenmclean. So just okay.
Shoot. Okay, so I'm ripping you.
Plug time.
Fair enough. Now, Lewis sees a deeper distinction, and the distinction is between science and religion and magic and technology. And the distinction is this: science and religion are about conforming to some external truth, whereas magic and technology are about having the external conform to your desires.
Oh,
and
I see.
Yeah, the whole point of that is to say, yes, you can have science and religion, as the Ferengi do have religion, but if it's based on your desires, then it's not true science, or it's not true religion. Yeah, sure, you could have science that's based on cultural prejudices, economic biases, philosophical biases, but that's not really good science. True science is about conforming your ideas to the external truth. True religion, yeah, you could have religion that's based on your tastes of music, your cultural biases, your philosophical biases, but that's not very good religion. True religion is that which conforms to some external truth. Kant pointed this out. You could have certain interpretations of grace, certain interpretations of communion, certain interpretations of baptism, where it's about having God conform to the person. But genuine religion is about the person conforming to the external demands of virtue, the external demands of God. And perverse religion is about what the Ferengi are all about, where they say greed is eternal. They'll say things like Latinum. Oh my goodness, my mind is drawing a blank with the.
Hold on, I'll get it. Greed is eternal is rule of acquisition 10. Latinum nature decays, but Latinum lasts
Latinum
forever.
is forever. Yeah.
Rule 102.
Okay, so it's about having their religious ideas conform to their internal heart, rather than taking Lewis's ideal of saying, okay, this is what we desire, this is the external, and I will conform to, I desire transcendent joy, and I will conform to it. No, you change the desires, you change the landscape, and you try to have that conform to your internal self. That's when you engage in what Kant calls a religion of magic. When you take communion not to have it change your heart, but to change God's opinion of you, you've become a heretic.
You started trying to bribe God.
You're trying to bribe God, which is exactly what the Ferengi are all about. They don't want to conform to the transcendent demands of joy. They want to have transcendent joy in their image, in their perception of it.
I'm
Go ahead.
I'm gonna try to defend the Ferengi a little bit on this point because I mean, while it's true the rules of acquisition are all about greed, there's a difference between greed and selfish greed, and the Ferengi are very big on the whole selfishness. They are, I mean, they're not full blown hedonists, as you pointed out earlier. They're, I don't know, half hedonists. They enjoy the pleasure. But I mean, they're very much materialists, and that's where the greed part comes in. But it's not a selfish kind of thing, and
They're
the two
not
things.
metaphysical materialists. They are ethical materialists.
But they do have. There were 2 points in the show that I remember. I remember recent, like just real quick after Worf joined the crew, he was complaining to O'Brien about dealing with the new situation. And Chief O'Brien says that Quark has a code of conduct, and once you understand that and understand he's always going to follow that, then
That
what he
wasn't
does.
that wasn't O'Brien. That was Cisco.
Cisco said that about somebody.
Yeah,
Said
he's
that
getting
about
a coffee. He's getting a rectagino when he says it in his office.
it's they have, when you understand the rules, you understand his sense of what he thinks is honorable. But the one that really stands out in my mind is it was an episode with Rom and O'Brien where Rom actually spoke of the great material continuum.
Right.
Yeah, and he calls it material, but it's not really a materialist concept in metaphysics. It's a you have to understand there's a difference between materialism in metaphysics and materialism in ethics. Materialism in metaphysics is the idea that there is nothing but matter in motion, right? Nothing else exists, right? And that's materialism when most philosophers talk about it. But in common usage, when we usually say, "Oh, that's materialistic," we usually mean ethical materialism, or the idea of the things you have being the most important, rather than say the people you know or what you do or anything like that. And so the Ferengi are ethical materialists, but they're not metaphysical materialists because they have all this stuff about the divine treasury and the great material continuum, and they have all this pseudo-religious stuff.
Well, the thing about
They
the
believe
great
in an
material,
afterlife where you get treasure for how much you earned during this life.
right? And it's the thing about the great material continuum that makes me want to defend the Ferengi. I mean, I know they're not exactly likable, but what Nog was saying about the material continuum is that everybody has things. Everybody has possessions. Some possessions they have and they don't need, and then there are things they need and they don't have, but someone else does. It's basically the essence of trade is getting everybody not just they're not just about robbing everyone blind. It's about getting what you need by giving somebody something else. I mean, most Ferengi don't steal from you, they sell you something. And if they're a little edgy around the corners, I mean, a deal is a deal, and there are serious consequences for breaking a deal.
Hold on, though. What the Ferengi say is that a deal is a deal is a deal, and then they have a clause they don't read to anybody else, which is, but only between Ferengi.
And that goes into a little bit of racism, but I mean, the nature of what it is they're going to figure out what somebody needs, and the Ferengi are going to get what they need, which is material wealth, by giving them what they need. So it's not exactly the same as taking communion to bribe God. It's it's more of I'm not sure how to use that metaphor correctly, but I do see a difference between what the Ferengi do and what you were talking about with that metaphor.
I think you're both right.
But I'm especially right.
Well, I think you're both right because I think the Ferengi and Ayn Rand and capitalism are a mixed bag. You know, I'm with the whole 2 cheers for capitalism crowd, not the 3 cheers for capitalism crowd. You know, it's great as politics. It's not so great as an overarching philosophy of life, though.
Sure, but Captain Benjamin, you would also agree that with C.S. Lewis, where he says nobody really fancies himself or herself. We can't be misogynist Ferengi. Nobody really fancies himself or herself as evil. I mean, nobody really admires a double crosser.
Well, hold on.
I mean, even
Lewis
even
says,
Goldacott never sees himself as evil.
yeah. Well,
I know that's the whole point. Though.
Lewis says
I mean,
that
the Ferengi.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
I need to
No,
not
go ahead.
interrupt people. You go ahead first. I interrupt people too much. I need to wait my turn.
Well, my whole point is, sure, the Ferengi can come up with justifications. Yeah, that's true. I mean, in reality, I might have some toothbrushes and somebody else might have some toothpaste, and we could make an exchange and be better off because of it. Absolutely, that's the way reality works. Nobody doubts that. But on top of that, on top of this altruistic mentality, you've got the reality of the Ferengi really are trying to exploit people, even though they'll see it as altruism. Even though I mean the Nazis are going to talk. Okay, well I violated that internet rule. You never mention the Nazis, but they'll see themselves as self-sacrificial, living for something higher than they are. A lot of dangerous Marxists are going to say, okay, we're really aiming for egalitarianism. I mean, nobody sees themselves as doing something wretched. Not even the Ferengi. Even the Ferengi are going to talk about how trade benefits everybody, even when they're exploiting somebody.
Okay. Well, I've got 2 things to say about that. One is,
Sure.
while I am a defender of natural law and I often really see the abolition of man as a kind of Rosetta Stone to all of philosophy, and seems to apply to just about everything. So I always want to bring it up just about all the time. And you did it for me this time, which is great.
You're welcome.
But I'm not quite sure I agree that everybody sees themselves as being right or being ethical all the time. I really don't think that's really the case. I'm reminded of there's a great scene in Pirates of the Caribbean 4. I don't know if everybody's seen that, but Blackbeard, um, they say something to Blackbeard like I forget what the line to Blackbeard was, but Blackbeard's response is just really hilarious. He goes, "The truth of it be much more simple than that. I am a bad man." And I just thought that was great. And I think it's true that there are some people and sometimes who know what they're doing is wrong and they just don't give a crap. And that's happened. That does happen. Um, I think there
Sure.
are now. I think many times, most of the time, the vast majority of the time, people are coming up with justification after explanation after whiny excuse to try to justify whatever it is they're doing. I think that was the case with most of the Nazis. And speaking of Nazis, this is something I think really needs to be dealt with in on the internet in general, and that is the issue of bringing up Nazis. In fact, that we could have a whole episode just on that. But
Godwin's Law.
yeah, Godwin's
We've
Law
already
is
brought it up anyway when we were talking about the Kardashians way back in the first or second episode,
oh yeah.
and how much they parallel, between Nazis and Jews. But anyway, go on.
Well, Godwin's law is that in any internet discussion of sufficient length, someone will bring up the Nazis. And
I
that
like
is that it is a fact, not a value. People have started to take Godwin's law as though it were a value, as though for some reason you shouldn't, or analogies to Nazism or Hitler are somehow always inappropriate or incorrect or something. And I say, no, Hitler and the Nazis are a pretty good common standard of something we all agree is evil. And
But at the same time, a lot of people, I mean, there is an appropriate mention of Hitlerian philosophy and what Nazism was all about, but there's also the inappropriate usage where the trick is to
Yes.
accuse someone of being a Nazi,
right,
trying to draw a parallel. Not,
right,
Yeah.
don't
That's
use
right.
it as the ad hominem fallacy.
Right.
But there are legitimate times when you can have legitimate arguments that do rely on the assumption that the Nazis were evil, because that is a common assumption most people share.
It's like my
And
favorite
yeah.
bad Godwin invocation is, Hitler was a vegetarian.
Oh, yeah. I say it like this. There's some goodness in everyone. Hitler didn't smoke, for example. um,
Some goodness in what? Sorry, I my headphones cut out there.
there's some goodness in everyone. Hitler didn't smoke, for example.
Oh yeah, good for him.
Now where were we on the Ferengi before we went off and talked about Nazis?
Well, we were talking about their motivations.
All right, desire. Yeah.
Well,
I think.
Go ahead.
I think not everything the Ferengi do is a complete fabrication when they are justifying their actions. When the Ferengi are talking to someone in authority, like Cisco or Odo, then they tend to ham up the innocent factor a little bit. I'm just a simple businessman taking care of my customers' humble needs.
Right, and
But
Garrick
when you
is just
corner-
a tailor.
Right. But when anyone else is just talking Ferengi philosophy, they're a little bit more honest about their justifications. They're a little bit more direct. It's not, oh, this is good because it's like, this is how it is, and I think it's a good thing. They're a little bit more, I don't know what the right way to say this is. There's a little more direct honesty to the justification. They don't pretend that it's altruistic. They don't pretend that it's noble. They just, this is good. This is what I do. This is why I do it. When they're talking with someone in a position of authority, they do try to make it sound like it would be good by the other person's standard of good, which kind of has that hypocritical false justification thing to it.
Yeah.
But who doesn't suck up to the boss every once in a while? That's actually one of the rules of acquisition.
Yes, it is.
Always suck
My-
up to the boss.
It never
Doesn't
hurts to
matter.
suck up to the boss.
All right.
My view, though, is that of positive psychology.
It's Rule 33. It never hurts to suck up to the boss. Sorry. Go
Right.
on.
Sure. It never hurts to suck up to the boss. And peace is good for business, and war is good for business. The next couple of rules of acquisition.
Very
35, 30.
Machiavellian.
My thought, though, is that people are motivated by something good, not something evil. I mean, to take up smoking, for example. Hitler wasn't a smoker. Good for him. And he had a pretty mustache.
That was
Good
a
for him.
joke, I mean, I think smoking's unwise. I don't think it's necessarily evil.
It's unwise, but it probably brings more harm than goodness. And you could say that for a whole slew of things.
Yeah, sure.
But we're generally motivated.
Sorry, Tolkien. Okay, anyway, you go. Sorry.
We're generally motivated by something positive rather than something negative. Augustine, in the Pear Tree. Excuse me. Why did he steal the pears? Well, if you were to ask him, he would say, yes, I stole the pears. Why did I want them? No, I wasn't interested in pears. As a matter of fact, once we had stolen them, we tossed them away. We didn't really want them. What I wanted was the camaraderie. What I wanted was the partnership in the theft. I wanted to actually be friends with the people who were stealing the pears. And so his motivation was actually something pious, because partnership, friendship is something good. He wanted that little bit of goodness that came from his action.
That's actually very true. I've heard where a lot of people who write computer viruses and send them out, and they destroy all companies' computers, or there's these huge scares that happen every few years or whatever.
Right.
People think, oh, they're just malicious. They just want to take down this corporation, or they want to extort them, or something, or blackmail them, something like that. Well, not necessarily. Maybe if you are like that, I won't deny that. But the majority of them do it for the notoriety, for their community of people
Hold
who
on.
write these viruses. They want to be well known as a guy who can do something like this, who can bring down such and such corporation.
Hold on,
Right.
though. That was true in the 1980s. As a computer science major, I have to tell you that the world has changed since then. Nowadays, a lot of people who write viruses are based in places like Africa or or Eastern countries, and they are in it for the money. They're not some grungy hacker in some
Sure.
garage anymore. But the reason the grungy hackers in the garage used to do that was what you're saying.
But Lieutenant Benjamin, my whole point, though, is that they're interested in it for something pious. Like, money in and of itself isn't bad. I mean, it's a means to an end. You can get more things with money. So, I mean, in and of itself, it's.
Oh, sure. Yeah, evil is always a parasite.
My whole point, though, is when somebody's interested in doing something, they're not interested in the evil of it. They're interested in what little good could come of it.
Right. Yes, evil is always a parasite. It always depends on the goodness that it is associated with to retain any of its potency or power. Because hardly anyone ever desires evil for evil's sake. And the only exception would be the sort of thing Lewis writes about in Paralandra with the unman.
Right.
But we hardly ever encounter that in daily life. Perhaps never.
Well, when you look at the philosophy underlying what you and I are saying here, you find something Augustinian or medieval, in that there's a certain order to the way things are. I can pursue my loves. I love my family. I love justice. I love money. I love sex. I love alcohol. I love God. But there's an order to the way things ought to be. And if I love the lesser more than the greater, that is the Augustinian definition of evil. If I pursue my country over and above justice, it's very easy to see how that would become evil. If I pursue alcohol over and above my family, very easy to see how that becomes evil. And so the Augustinian definition of goodness versus badness is that which is in its proper order. You prefer the greater over the lesser. And my criticism of Ferengi philosophy, I think, would be the same as Ayn Rand's criticism of Ferengi philosophy. They pursue the lesser over the greater. They prefer profit above justice.
Well, yeah, except that Rand's idea of justice and Augustine's idea of justice are somewhat two different ideas of justice.
Sure, yeah, but the criticism is the same. They prefer the lesser over the greater.
Sure.
And that's the problem.
Sure. And that's one of the reasons why I thought that if the Ferengi were to get a copy of Ayn Rand in their own language on their own planet or something to that effect, that would probably have a huge impact on their society. It would be a revolutionary thing.
No doubt.
Even though the writers, I think, conceived of the Ferengi as extreme Randians already, because they don't get that deep into Rand. I mean, they're, after all, they're writing a television show, not consciously doing philosophy all the time.
Well, they perceived of them as capitalists.
Yeah.
Right.
Capitalists who believe in capitalism and the associated greed and selfishness that's often associated with capitalism and ethics as good things, and that is, I think we can give a lot of the credit for that idea to Rand, for that idea existing in the world to Rand, because there are not that many people who will say that, or at least not before the 1950s.
Sure.
Well, definitely sounds like a topic we may want to come back to in the future here.
Yeah, of course.
There,
Brandon and I have this tendency to relate everything to C.S. Lewis,
and definitely, especially if we get Kirby's friend in here who knows who is a Randian, in his words,
right?
then that will definitely spice things up a bit. But any final thoughts we want to bring up on this?
Winston Churchill said that democracy is the worst system ever, except for all of the others that have been tried. And I'd say the same thing of capitalism. It's the worst ever, except all the others. Because all the others have failed or have squelched human potential or have, not worked out. And so I think that the free enterprise, the entrepreneurial spirit, when it's undertaken honestly, is a good thing. And the somebody who won't whine to the government when they're having problems, but will solve their own problems as much as possible, is something that deserves some respect, even though the Ferengi philosophy and the Randian philosophy of greed being inherently good are, not something I'd agree with. I'd agree more with Odo, because, like I said, I'm a social conservative first. But Odo and Quark, like I said, are very much representative of the internal dialogue of the political right in the United States. And when we get into specific episodes, or when we do the Odo episode, I think that will probably become more clear. Okay, people, next time we're going to talk about Picard and his views on God.
All right.
So tune in again. You can check out more episodes at Trekosophy.com. And live long and prosper.
Let's do an episode on why Kirby thinks Enterprise is the greatest rendition of Star Trek of all time.
Oh my gosh, what?
I'm just screwing with you. But I do think it's a really good Trek.
Absolutely.
So,
Oh,
can
for sure.
next week we discuss why Jonathan Archer is God? Is that a good...
Ben, was it
Absolutely.
you who linked that YouTube video proof that Picard really is French?
Not me.
Somebody somewhere. I saw the video once in a conversation. It's a definitive proof that Jean-Luc Picard is actually French. And it's a little 10-second clip from the very first episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, where they get surrounded by the energy barrier, and Picard tells his helmsman, who is one Chief O'Brien at the time, send the following message in all languages on all frequencies. We surrender.
Oh, totally.
Saw that one coming.
It was like 10, 15 minutes into the episode. You get a French captain and he surrenders.
Yeah.
Or how awesome Enterprise was? Because
At the-
Enterprise was so much better than Deep Space Nine or any of the rest. Like, what was it you wanted to discuss?
Them's fighting words there, pal.
Yeah. We're gonna be.
And everyone
let's
needs
be
to
as
practice their Picard voice. You got to be able to say, make it so. Engage.
Yeah, that needs work right there.
Yeah. My Picard voice is terrible.
Needs to be deeper for one thing, I think.
Make
Right, I've
it
been watching
so.
my.
There you
Blu-ray
go,
update.
That's more like it. Yeah, because you
Still
sounded
all
like
right.
12-year-old Picard when you said that earlier, but with the deeper voice, it sounds more like it.
Ben, can I ask you a question, an honest question? This is
Totally.
man to man. Who's hotter, T'Pol or Kira Nerys?
Well, probably to Paul,
All right, okay. That's all I
but
want to
that
hear.
doesn't make it a better show.
In terms of show,
Let me
that
ask
would
you a
succeed.
question. Who's more Vulcan, to Paul or Kira Nerys?
Well, that belligerent 110-pound Kira Nerys doesn't strike me as anything at all.
Well,
I'll say there were some nice things about Enterprise. I mean, but the majority of the show did come out. It just always reminded me of poorly written fanfic.
What got to
But-
me was the theme song. That's it.
You know, I actually liked the theme song and the
Good
video
guy.
montage.
Oh yeah, it's been a long time.
I have to say, the most important thing to come out of France since Napoleon is probably Daft Punk.